Reparations isn't a remedy for racism. Reparations is a debt that's owed from slavery. Reparations is more than a check. But the very first thing it is a check. And that goes to the living descendant survivors of slavery here in what we now call the United States of America. So stop playing with our money and get us our money.
Did you know that Africa is a place where the body of the first man was found? My daddy says that makes it a place where all people originated from. I'm from Africa, you from Africa, you African booty scratcher. I'm always reaching. We make niggas disappear like that triangle out Bermuda. They can't find his body, but they know that I'm the shooter. I say cut my sentence in half, and I spread a little rumor. Damn, well you can look in Oklahoma if you want to find him sooner.
Living day by day in my hood on the spot. See the same old thing, same dope fiends, cops. Just the average day in the streets, California. 5-0, find a young girl dead round the corner. Mommy's on her knees, she had tears in her eyes, and nobody knew why the young girl had to die. People look ashamed, it's been like this for years. Bloody sheets on her body, face wet from her mommy's tears. She couldn't have been over 4 or 5. And if mommy wasn't baked, she would still be alive. But now the street is a place, she could be swallowed by death. Brothers taking each other's lives and going to rest in peace. I wonder if heaven got together. My cousin died last year, man, I still can't let go. I walk the streets of my city, of my neighborhood, seeing dope fiends living off canned goods. 15 niggas on the corner, and niggas die young in California. 5-0 or get a dope case and flaunt it. Have your ass on America's Most Wanted. But I don't slang or even gangbang. And though my old school homies do the same thing, I still got love cause you gotta live, so you can give and raise a family, G. But you gotta do your best slinging D-O-P-E. So keep a grip on yourself and stay mellow. And welcome to the ghetto. 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 From across the seas comes cocaine. But you never seen a black man fly the plane. Look at the news, a young black death. Was it drug related? Take a guess. I flash when I look in the mirror black, cause my reflection is a 9mm gat. I think about genocide and have thoughts on my homies who died. Everybody backstabbing, but I ain't the one to talk, I'm in the gap. Death give a shit about your color, but yet I see more dead young brothers. I'm going crazy out here, seeing 24 brothers die by the end of the year. And I still gotta deal with the 5-0. And I stopped selling dope in 9-0. But if it came to it, I'd probably still do it. Put a 9 in my drawers, get straight to it. I hope that I never see the day that I get 20 years for a cake. BK8 as a key to open up the door for the more money. But I ain't gotta do that, G. Cause I'm down with the F-A to the C, to the U, to the L-T-Y, G-Nut, extra large, and S-P-I, C-E, making niggas feel like Jello. And welcome to the ghetto. Welcome to the ghetto. Welcome to the ghetto. Welcome to the ghetto.
unless mistakes are made.
Who to say, Major? Who to say? Hachi Yali.
Found a place for you to ford upstream. It's good and solid up there. Didn't you speak to him in Seminole, sir? That's one of the riddles, Captain. He was born a slave, raised a Seminole. Now he works for the American Army.
I push fudge in my family, only got it, so I trust and bust 50 at those who want to try to cross us. I'll be running slash from here to Japan. No money, no comprende. They versus look like Mexican. Moving yeah every day on your tracks, man. Important, extorting money laundering. I be running slash from here to Japan. No money, no comprende. They versus look like Mexican. They don't really understand.
What it do, what it do, what it do. It's your host, Vino the Most. Back for another classic in the book of the SGI Talks. And this chapter right here is Borneo, from Borneo, Malaysia to Madagascar to Ecuador. I have questions about black people. I'm going to do an AI deep dive that I did on this situation. And it's a topic that I brought up on True Zone the other day, where I have people that we finna check out this video where they talking about the people in Madagascar, the original people. It's not Africans. If they come from Malaysia, they come from the islands. That they was the first ones to inhabit. They was the first ones to travel on boat to this island. And they was the first ones to inhabited Madagascar before black people. But I found that interesting because when I come to the founders, or who they say are the first black people that was in Ecuador, it had something to do with they said that the person was an enslaved person from Madagascar. And I find that very interesting, with that being on the east of Africa. Matter of fact, southeast of Africa. And this is early in the game. So it triggered me, and it solidified once again that they would just put an African term on the black people that's found over here. But I'm gonna shed a little bit more light on that first before they get to this video, because with this DNA and with the science, because science is now the God to some of these people. Science is now God to some of these people, and if science don't say it, it's not correct. If science don't say it, it's not correct. Shout out to Mulatto coming through with the hot what it do. So he say, I have Filipino ancestry via slaves from Madagascar that were brought to Virginia. See, that's interesting. So they say Madagascar. It's like I say, that's coming from the southeast. It's an island southeast of Africa. But then whenever stuff is documented within history, they'll say, well, these are the African traditions. Like Africa just have one tradition. Like it's not thousands and different of traditions. But we're going to get into that later on. Make sure that you're pulled up and rolled up. I'm glad that you showed up to comment, like, subscribe, tell a friend, and do it again. Madagascar, Africa is genetic eczema. So we're going to check this out real quick. And it's like I say, when I peep this and I say, damn. So they saying that some people from Malaysia traveled on boats, and they was the first ones to inhabit the island before black people inhabit the island. And they say 2,000, 3,000 years ago. But it's no possibility that black people came to America. I just find that crazy. It's hell, but we finna look at this though. I'm finna show you what I seen.
This is a child from Madagascar. At first glance, you might assume she's African, and you'd be right, partly. But if you look closely, something feels unusual. Her features don't quite match what most people expect from someone born in Africa. That's not just a personal impression, it's a pattern you'll see again and again in Madagascar. Across this island nation, things don't quite fit the map. Malagasy doesn't sound like any other African language. The architecture, food, and even traditional farming techniques have elements that seem more familiar in a distinct region of the globe. And if you look at the DNA, things become even more surprising. So how did this island, located just a short trip from Mozambique, end up with a population unlike any other on the planet? The answer is hidden in the island's deep past. Madagascar was uninhabited for most of human history. When people finally arrived, they didn't come from one place. They came from two completely different parts of the world, and they brought with them different languages, tools, customs, and genes. In this video, we're going to trace the origin of the Malagasy people using archaeological findings, linguistic links, and, most importantly, genetic data. We'll look at how the island was first settled, how its people became a unique blend of two worlds, and why the Malagasy genome is still one of the most unusual in all of human genetics. By the end, you'll see how a remote island off the coast of Africa became the meeting point of two ancient migrations, one from the west and one from the east. This is my great-great-grandfather, and yesterday I was able to see him for the first time. Thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring today's video. Tracing origins across the Indian Ocean made me look into my own ancestors. MyHeritage makes it easy to build your family tree and find relatives thanks to their huge database of over 36 billion historical records and more than 90 million registered users. I've managed to put together a family tree of over 200 people in just a few clicks, going back up to 10 generations. Start with adding the magic 7, which are yourself, your parents, and your grandparents. This allows MyHeritage's algorithm to search for matches in historical records and other users' family trees. It increases the chance of adding an entire branch to your tree automatically through instant discoveries, which showed me my great-great-grandfather I had never heard of before. In fact, this allowed me to see his face for the first time. I've used the MyHeritage photo features to enhance, colorize, and animate his picture, giving life to a photo that is over 100 years old, and seeing it made me realize just how closely he resembled my grandmother. My family tree goes as far back as the 17th century. Surprisingly, my oldest ancestor was born just a few miles from my father's birthplace in Normandy, which means that my family had lived there for at least 300 years. I also found a record of my grandmother's great-uncle, indicating that he was killed in combat in northern France during the First World War. If you want to learn more about your family history, start building your tree today. Use my link in the description or scan the QR code in the top corner for a 14-day free trial. Madagascar is one of the largest islands on Earth. Today, it's home to over 30 million people. But for tens of thousands of years, it had no human population at all. While humans were spreading across Europe, Asia, and even reaching Australia and the Americas, Madagascar remained empty. Despite sitting just 400 kilometers from the African mainland, no one settled it until relatively recently. That long isolation had consequences.
So, once again, we have them saying that people traveled all over the world. People traveled all the way to the Americas before they hit Madagascar. Even though they say that it's, 400 kilometers. How long is that in miles? Hold on. Okay, so with it being 248 miles, but they saying people done touched America before they touched Madagascar.
Madagascar's animals and ecosystems evolved without human influence. Lemurs, small primates found nowhere else in the world, thrived in the forests. Giant flightless birds, similar to ostriches but much larger, walked the grasslands. Other creatures, like the fossa, tortoises, and even unique types of frogs and chameleons, also developed in ways not seen anywhere else. So when did humans finally arrive on the island? And how do we know? Some groups in Madagascar describe a mysterious group called the Vazimba, short forest dwellers who lived in the highlands before being pushed out or absorbed. Some scholars believe this might refer to the island's first settlers. But there's no firm genetic evidence for a lost or vanished population. For a long time, it was assumed that the first settlers must have been African, arriving by boat from the nearby coast. But over the past few decades, new evidence has pointed in a different direction. Archaeological traces like pottery, animal bones, and tools show that the first permanent settlements date to about 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. That's very recent in human history. But what's even more surprising is what the
So they using animals, they're using pottery, animal bones, animal teeth, tools to be able to determine the time frame. And bring that back. Hold on.
those early different direction. Archaeological traces like pottery, animal bones, and tools show that the first permanent settlements date to about 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. That's very recent in human history.
They saying after Christ. They damn near saying after Christ. There wasn't even nobody over there until after Christ. The science world and came in and said, no, 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 no. Even though it's 230 miles away from Africa, that nobody touched this place until after Christ.
But what's even more surprising is what those early
But they gonna say that people came to, what they said that the people came to the Australians, what, 100,000 years ago, 80,000, but only to Madagascar, not even, only 2,000 years ago. And I ain't jacking it.
settlements contain. The tools, crops, and materials don't match those used in East Africa at the time. Instead, all the genetic and archaeological data point to the same conclusion. The first people to live in Madagascar came from far away, and they arrived with technologies and knowledge that allowed them to cross long distances by sea. They were the first to step foot on the island, but they would not remain the only ones for long. When linguists began comparing Malagasy to other languages, they noticed something strange. It didn't resemble Swahili, Somali, or any Bantu languages spoken in Africa. Instead, it sounded more like languages spoken in Southeast Asia, specifically on the island of Borneo. Malagasy is an Austronesian language. It belongs to the same family as Malay, Javanese, Tagalog, and even Hawaiian. Its closest relative is the Manyan language, still spoken today in southern Borneo by inland river communities. But it wasn't just language that linked Madagascar to Southeast Asia. How did Austronesian people get there? The exact route is still debated. Some researchers believe they traveled along the coast of India and across the Arabian Sea. Others think they may have island hopped through the Maldives or Seychelles. But regardless of the exact path, the distance was massive, more than 7,000 kilometers across open water. These settlers formed
7,000 kilometers. That's 4,350 miles. 4,350 miles that they traveled on water. They said they had the technology to do this on water. And they got there before the Africans got there, which was only 230 miles away. This is the story that they trying to tell us, and I ain't jacking it. But still at the same time, my bad, but still at the same time, come back and say it wasn't no black people in America. And for an island right next to a continent full of black people, where they so-called say everybody come from, where they so-called say that people walk from there to Australia, got there from Australia 80 to 100,000 years ago, but people only got to Madagascar 2,000 years ago. And black people never came to America. But these other people did all these old amazing ass shit. And niggas ain't never won a world champion or nothing.
From tight-knit communities. Over generations, they adapted to the island's environment, created new customs, and likely had little contact with the outside world. For several centuries, it's possible they were the only inhabitants of Madagascar. But over time, others came. And unlike the first group, these newcomers didn't have to cross an ocean. They came from much closer, just across the Mozambique Channel. And their arrival would forever reshape the island's population. They didn't speak Austronesian languages. They didn't farm rice or sail outrigger canoes. But they would become just as important to the Malagasy story. At some point after the first Austronesian settlers arrived, new groups began to reach Madagascar, this time from the African mainland. These migrants were Bantu-speaking people, part of a broader movement that had already spread across much of Central and Southern Africa. They likely traveled by boat across the narrow Mozambique Channel. The distance may be short compared to the Austronesian journey, but the impact was enormous. These Bantu groups brought their own crops, like sorghum and millet, as well as ironworking technology. They also introduced cattle herding, different housing styles, and new cultural practices.
So the people from Malaysia, they didn't bring no crops, no food or nothing. They just brought a language. Coming 4,350 miles away.
Over time, they established themselves along the western and northern coasts of Madagascar. What happened when these African newcomers began interacting with the earlier Southeast Asian population? The two groups mixed, but not in a simple or symmetrical way. Genetic studies show a clear sex-biased pattern of ancestry. Most of the Y-DNA, inherited from fathers in the Malagasy population, is African. Meanwhile, much of the mitochondrial DNA, inherited from mothers, is Southeast Asian. This suggests that African men and Southeast Asian women were the main contributors to early Malagasy families. This pattern wasn't unique to a single village or time period. It appears consistently across different regions and studies. It reflects how the population was shaped not just by migration, but by social dynamics. Who married whom, who formed families, and who passed on their genes. The result was a population with ancestry from two completely different parts of the world. And it didn't happen all at once. African groups arrived in waves over several centuries. Some settled permanently, while others came through trade or seasonal migration. By the end of the first millennium AD, most of the island had some mix of African and Southeast Asian ancestry, but the proportions varied widely depending on location. Still, something else was happening alongside this mixing. Population growth, expansion into new regions, and the development of distinct...
Now they saying that many people, that many different groups. Now it's that many different groups and I guess many different families throughout the island. That's it. I ain't jacking none of it.
Cultural identities. Different groups began to form in different parts of the island. Some leaned more toward their African roots. Others kept stronger ties to Southeast Asian ancestry. And even today, those differences can still be seen not just in genes, but in language, appearance, and tradition.
Hold on, she look kind of cool. But they saying that these people traveled on, they ain't even say what type of boats. They just said they had the equipment or the inventions to be able to travel 4,350 miles, bring no crops, just language. They was the first ones to inhabit it. But black people never, even though the people that's the black people that's in those areas, the Negritos, they say that the Negritos are the oldest people within those areas. And said that the Asian people came later. But the Asian people end up over here. I ain't even jacking the time frame. I don't even know when these niggas got over here, but I'm not taking a time frame. That's for sure. But this is the scientists. So a nigga like me, a regular nigga, motherfucker ain't gonna believe me. But this shit is just common sense though. Because when we get to looking at this history and shit, which I'm gonna bring in this other shit, it's like, hold on. It looked like some mislabels.
Today, those differences can still be seen not just in genes, but in language, appearance, and tradition. Today, if you look at the DNA of Malagasy people, you'll see a mix of African and Southeast Asian ancestry. But that mix isn't the same everywhere on the island. In general, most Malagasy carry around 60% sub-Saharan African ancestry and 35% Southeast Asian admixture.
Now, how they gonna say that the Malaysia people or the Asian people was the first ones there, but they ain't got more of the DNA? So-called. See, this is the trickery.
The small amount, roughly 5%, from West Eurasian or Indian sources. That last piece likely comes from later trade networks across the Indian Ocean, involving Arab and South Asian merchants.
Redeem Google Play points and score limited edition merch. Go reward yourself. Go play.
With USAA Safe Pilot, I can save when I road trip safely.
Or with USAA Safe Pilot Miles, I can save when I staycation. Yeah.
But how exactly does this ancestry vary across regions, and what explains those differences? Let's start with the highlands. Groups like the Marina and Betsileo live in the island's central region, at higher elevations. These populations tend to have the highest Southeast Asian ancestry, sometimes more than 65%. This is likely because they descend more directly from the original Austronesian settlers who moved inland early and stayed relatively isolated. On the other hand, groups living along the west and northwest coasts, such
So a person with more African, they say, I guess DNA genetics, look like, you know, they got a little curl on there or whatever. But the fact is that I'm still not jacking that these people traveled here or was the first ones to inhabit it before the people that was closer there. Now, I could say now, a nigga would believe that they always been there probably, if they can say that. These niggas always been there if they can say that. Niggas don't know how they got there. But for the niggas to come 4,000 miles away and niggas is 200 miles away, I ain't jacking that.
such as the Sakalava and Antakarana, often have over 80% African ancestry. These areas were closer to the African mainland and more exposed to repeated migration and trade. This geographic structure likely reflects how the population...
Now, when I'm also looking at these pictures, these are some good pictures right here. So when I'm looking at these pictures, so we got this picture right here because I'm going to try to compare it with the picture that they got going on in the Americas. So these some good pictures right here.
Exposed to repeated migration admixture. Different regions saw different rates of mixing, and those patterns were passed down over generations. So even though Madagascar is a single nation...
This what they say is going on in Madagascar and being going on in Madagascar.
Today, its population is still genetically diverse. Some regions reflect earlier Austronesian roots. Others bear stronger African influence, and these differences haven't faded over time. They've stayed in place, passed down in family lines and community histories. The result is a population that is genetically mixed, but
genetically mixed. So this what the population looking like with a more of an African DNA, I guess. They say that the average is more African DNA.
not homogeneous. A mosaic shaped by where people settled, who they married, and how their communities grew over centuries. Today, Madagascar is a modern nation. Its people share a national identity, speak the same official language, and participate in a common...
Speak the same language. Okay, just a good picture.
Political and cultural life. But behind this unity, the trace
Black and white. Was this how they was looking in the 1400s, 1500s?
of its unusual past are still there, especially in the DNA of its people. The legacy of the two founding populations, Southeast Asian and African, is still visible across the island. It's not just a historical curiosity.
Is this how they looking? Okay, so we getting a good look at the Madagascar people.
It's embedded in family trees, spoken accents, and the physical appearance of people in different regions. But if these migrations happened over 1,000 years ago, how have the differences lasted so long? The answer lies in geography, demography, and social structure. Geographically, Madagascar is a diverse island. Its central highlands are separated from the coasts by rugged terrain. Travel between regions was historically difficult, especially before the colonial era. As a result, populations in different areas remained relatively isolated for centuries. That isolation helped preserve local ancestry patterns. In the highlands, where the Merina and Betsileo live, people remained in more closed communities. These populations grew mostly from the early Austronesian settlers and experienced less influence from later African migration. In contrast, the coasts, especially the west and north, remained open to African migration and trade for much longer, especially less influence from.
Now, I find it very interesting that with these people being by the equator and being in this part of the world, that they will keep their pigment, the light pigment, and having curly hair. And they said they've been there for thousands of years. Most of these niggas be saying, "Oh well, shit, man, if it's gonna be a mutation is gonna happen if you there for so long." That shit don't look like no mutation going on with they motherfucking ass. And they say they was the first ones to inhabit it. These niggas still look like a damn Asian. But so-called where he come from, where the Negritos, where they so-called come from, the Malaysian people, they so-called been there since, what, 70,000 years ago. They don't know when these motherfuckers got here. They just gonna say, yeah, they was here before the black people. And ain't been no mutation. I don't believe none of that dumbass shit. I'm just putting a flashlight on this shit, man.
Later African migration. In contrast, the coasts, especially the west and north, remained open to African migration and trade for much longer, which gradually increased African ancestry in those areas. Demographically, small founding groups had large impacts. If a small population with mostly Southeast Asian ancestry settled early in one area, their descendants would maintain that ancestry unless there was significant mixing. In many regions, such large-scale mixing never occurred. That's why the differences between coastal and highland populations have remained so stable over time. And socially, certain customs may have reinforced the patterns. In some areas, intermarriage between groups may have been limited or controlled by social status, political alliances, or...
That's a good picture right there. So, it's like I say, I got questions because it's going to lead to the next segment of Ecuador. And how did these so-called people get to Ecuador, or is it a mislabel?
geography. Over time, these boundaries, formal or informal,
It's a good picture.
would help maintain distinct ancestry profiles. What's remarkable is that despite all of Madagascar's internal movement in recent history, its genetic structure has stayed largely intact. Modern studies show that even today, individuals from different regions often carry ancestry patterns that reflect their local history. These aren't small variations. The differences in Southeast Asian and African ancestry between highland and coastal regions can be dramatic, and they tell a story that stretches back over 1,500 years to the arrival of the first settlers. A story of two continents meeting through long journeys.
They saying after death. They say wasn't even nobody there during the BC times, even though they trying to tell us that some damn and people walked over here to America through the Bering Strait back 20,000 years ago. And also at the same time trying to tell us that the motherfuckers got to Australia 100,000 years ago. And still at the same time try to say it wasn't no black people in America before the Europeans. Come on, man. Look at this big ass ocean right here. These niggas traveled on this big ass ocean from way over here to over here. These niggas right here by motherfucking Africa. These niggas say these niggas travel from over here to over here. That they was the first ones on the island. And this shit is crazy.
Small settlements and gradual mixing. Madagascar's genetic story is one of the most unusual in the world. It brings together two distant populations, Bantu-speaking Africans and Austronesian sailors from Southeast Asia, on an island that had never been inhabited before. These groups arrived separately, they spoke unrelated languages, used different tools, and had no shared history. And yet, over time, they built something together. A population, a language, and a culture that combined elements of both origins.
So are these the Asians that the Europeans first seen? These black people? But when they got up a little bit more further, they got a bit more lighter and shit. But are these the Asians? I don't know. I got questions. I'm gonna have to dive in on that one.
The mixing wasn't equal in every place. Some regions kept more of their Southeast Asian ancestry, while others leaned more heavily toward their African roots. And that variation has stayed in place, preserved by geography, community structure, and patterns of settlement that stretch back over 1,000 years. The Malagasy are the result of a process.
Thousands of years. Madagascar. Infant in the village.
Process that took centuries to unfold. A process shaped by the sea, by distance, and by the human desire to explore and settle new places. Quick reminder that you can start uncovering.
So, Pete. So I say, damn, hold on. So Madagascar. So which I ain't jacking the story that they talking about, but it took me back to whenever I did the little breakdown on them finding black people in Ecuador, right? And it take me back to this situation right here with these folks right here. It take me back to these folks right here. Now that's why I was taking a look at. Hold on, I was taking a look at all those people, all those old school pictures, and all those, those photos that they had of the people in Madagascar. And the reason that I bring this photo up is because it goes with this right here. So that picture right there was Francisco Diarobi. And they say that he was the son of a black man named Andres Medici from the Madagascar. And they say that his mother was an indigenous woman from Nicaragua. But for some reason, he's supposed to be a Zambo, a mix with indigenous and a slave. But how they come out like this, the black people? Because I got mixed people in my family, and the kids is light skin. They come out looking mixed. Why are these people looking like black people when they're supposed to be Zambos, when they're supposed to be blacks from Africa, a black from Africa and a indigenous person from America, which they say don't look nothing like no African. They look more like Eskimos and Indians. Mexicans, Now, we didn't see kids of black people and Mexicans. I don't think they coming out looking like this. I don't think they coming out looking like this right here. But it just took me back to this story where I say, damn, okay, so because I go against them saying that the first black people that was in Ecuador was from shipwrecks. And that's how they form their communities. So I say, hold on. Let me look at this with AI. I got some questions. I'll just do it like that. It's all good. That ain't gonna get bigger. It's all good. So I say, basically, was Andres from Madagascar? Or you say that Andre was an African man? And I find it interesting that they saying African man in Madagascar is not in Africa. It's his own island. Madagascar is his own island. It's not in Africa. But for them to say that he is an African man just because he is a black man, see, that's the mislabel. Because Madagascar is not in Africa. So it's just another mislabel just put on, just another so-called, just a term put on the peoples found in America. So we're gonna take a good. We're gonna kind of look at it a little bit more. Hold on. Okay, so they say he was enslaved. He was transported on a slave ship uh, headed towards West South America, or headed towards the Esmeralda, or whatever that word. This word works. Headed toward Ecuador in that area. Say he escaped an indigenous woman from Nicaragua from a ship. Okay, and once again, we got the shipwreck story where these people are so-called chained up at the bottom of the boats, and it's a shipwreck, and they're escaping, and informing these great communities. So we're gonna keep scrolling down. Okay, so he stands for the root of a remarkable Afro-Indigenous lineage that negotiated autonomy, resisted colony control, and shaped multicultural identities of coastal Ecuador. So once again, his descendants is these people right here, which this is his son right here. His mother is from Nicaragua. How is he that dark? When they try to say that it wasn't no black people in America. And the only reason that it is black people in America is because the Africans came over, which we see that Madagascar is not in Africa. So is this just the term because whenever they calling them Negro? In all the historical documents, they calling this person Negro, which we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that, but we're just gonna keep on asking. We're just gonna keep going down with AI was talking about, and they just talking about the sources. So the Wikipedia page states Stay Dry was a black man from Madagascar who escaped. So, however, the page does not identify the name of the ship, captain, Pacific enslavers, colonial company, or traders involved. So from this source alone, we cannot say who exactly enslaved him. Okay, while this page doesn't specifically the enslaver, historians know that in the mid 1500s, people from Madagascar in East Africa were trafficked across Indian Ocean and then rerouted into the Spanish and Portuguese Atlantic slave trade. So they saying that these people, I guess, either came from, you know what I'm saying, like went up under Africa. I guess they went over to Madagascar and then came back with them, or they just traveled across the Indian Ocean. Now, I kind of find that suspect for the simple fact that they really didn't even find, as far as some of those islands over there, until I would say kind of around that time. So why would they take that unknown route with money invested into these slaves, not really knowing what's, you know what I'm saying? I'm not really knowing that route like that. And once again, this is a mislabel because Madagascar is not in Africa. But for them to just say, oh, yeah, he's born in Africa. He's from Africa because during that time, the historians say, if we call you a Negro, you have to be born in Africa, when that's not the case. But this is have to do with the first so-called people of Ecuador. The first, I mean, not so-called people, but the first black people in Ecuador that they had recorded, so-called. Now, keep in mind how this shit be going on. So just like when I was checking out the Guyana shit, and they say, yeah, you know, motherfuckers touched over there like 1498. And then by 1816, they say that 96% of Guyana was unexplored. They've been over there for 400 years, and 96% of it is unexplored because they just on the coast. But they gonna say that these niggas over here in Ecuador, the founder is from Madagascar, and he's an African. And he had kids with the indigenous woman from Nicaragua, and they kids look like this. But these supposed to be the mulattoes. These supposed to be the Zambos. So I say, man, hold on, man. We gotta AI, man. I got questions. Okay, the page you're reading does not identify who enslaved Andres Madagascar and which the ship transported him. So they don't have these documentations. They say that this is a common thing in the 1500s. That the documentation when it comes to dealing with black people, that it's not official, but we have to say it's 100% for sure. But we're just gonna keep on scrolling down because let me scroll up. So I say, dig deeper and help me trace how people from Madagascar ended up in Ecuador during the 1500s. You say, absolutely. Let's dig deeper and trace the actual historical pathways that could explain how someone like Andres, a man from Madagascar, ended up on a slave ship off the coast of Ecuador in the mid 1500s. I ground this in what historians known about the global slave routes of the 16th centuries include the broader context from the search results. Okay. Let's take a look at this. How people from Madagascar reached Spanish America in the 1500s. A reconstruction based on known trade routes, empires, and maritime patterns. Step 1, Madagascar was already tied into global slave networks. By the early 1500s, Portuguese traders dominated the Indian Ocean's slave trade, capturing and purchasing enslaved people from Madagascar, Mozambique, Swahili Coast, and East Africa mainland. Now I find that interesting because they say that that Portuguese, that the Portuguese people and the Spanish people, so-called, had half the world to each other, and the Portuguese, so-called, really was just playing in Africa and within East Indias. Now I find it interesting for they peoples to end up in Ecuador. I find that interesting for they peoples to end up in Ecuador and not going past Brazil, going past all those other places where they found and where they building up their little empires within that area, for them to end up in Ecuador. What it do, Yodi, Big Brody? What it do? Okay, so they saying that he would have been enslaved by the Portuguese traders, not the Spaniards. So I find it interesting for him to end up, if the person really is from Madagascar, to end up, I guess, somewhere within the Panama area or within the Ecuador area, because these people is coming from the Panama area, or they so-called crossing over the Panama Isthmus, and they so-called bringing them down. That's how they bringing them to the West Coast, that they cross over on land, then they bring them down to the West Coast like that. So I find it interesting for early in the game, in the early 1500s, that some Portuguese people is within this area. But let me keep going. And say step 2, the Portuguese moved East Africans into Atlantic. Although most enslaved Africans and Spanish came from West Central Africa, the Congo, there is strong evidence that smaller numbers of East Africans include Madagascar. People were transported across the Indian Ocean and then rerouted into the Atlantic system. Now they saying that the people's coming from, so I guess they're saying that that the Portuguese is coming from Madagascar and passing all of India, going through the islands and passing Australia and passing all these places and ending up and taking these people, which would be a crazy amount of distance. I ain't even gonna look at that distance. And during this time, they was on caravels. You gotta understand, these are small boats during the time they on caravels. These is not big ships. So they say they was basically in East Africa, and I guess that they transported these people to Cape Verde, and then from Cape Verde to the Americas. So I guess they went around. So they went to the bottom of Africa, came up to Madagascar, came back through the same way, and kind of did it like that. That would make more sense than them going through the Indian Ocean. I don't know. These niggas it's not making sense. So which way did they go? Did they go through the Indian Ocean like they saying? Like they suggesting, were transported across the Indian Ocean? Or were they rerouted back around Africa to Cape Verde? Okay, so this is how the Pacific slave route went. How it worked. They arrived in the Caribbean ports in Cartagena and Nombre de Dos. They were marched overland across the Isthmus of Panama. And they were loaded in ships in Panama City. And they were transported around the coast of Peru, Ecuador. So they say this is some of the same routes brought enslaved Africans to early maroon communities in Ecuador, including the one founded by Andres and his family. Now, I find that very, very, very interesting Once again, they got the name. They say he's from Madagascar, but they really have no historical documents, which we're going to get to that because I'm asking those questions. So we got step 4. Once again, we got the shipwreck. We got shipwreck. Once again, they say that just like how I showed the video of the so-called how they said they was bringing over the slaves, as far as like the first video in like the 1930s, how they had them chained up like that or whatever. So they at the bottom of the boat like that, so-called, right? They at the bottom of the boat like that, so-called, and they have a shipwreck, and these niggas didn't die and drown out. They was able to escape. I can't jack that story, but they say that the shipwreck, they escaped. They started the maroon communities, and now we got the Afro and Indian Alliance. They just automatically cool with the people. They just automatically take the people in. Sound real crazy. So the Wikipedia page you're reading confirms that Andres and the indigenous woman from Nicaragua escaped from a slave ship anchored off Ecuador. This fits perfectly with the known pattern of Portuguese capture the East Africans sold into the Spanish market, transferred shipwreck. I got the people that just split up, getting these split chairs and shit. Just walked in, it's all good. And formation of autonomous maroon communities. Autonomous. So we keep it going. Hold on, I went too far there. My bad. Okay. Okay, why these people appear in Ecuador, although rare? These Madagascar individuals appeared in early Spanish American records because the Portuguese controlled Madagascar's slave trade. Spanish relied on Portuguese traders for enslaved labor. The Pacific route funneled enslaved Africans into Ecuador. The Pacific route. So hold on. So they saying that they brought these people all the way through the Indian Ocean. They didn't even come through the African Ocean. Come on now. We got to look at this. And now for some reason, Ecuador becomes a refuge for enslaved Africans who form powerful maroon communities. And this is where I say, where they take us from the land and they put these stories on the people. They can't justify the stories because they have no historical documents to say, yeah, this enslaver brought them over here. They was on this slave ship. None of that. They just put these labels on the people and use these terms to justify why black people is in these areas. Now they say we putting it all together. Here are the most historical plausible routes for Andre. Okay, so they say he was captured or purchased. So they don't even know what the hell going on. They just putting something together by Portuguese slavers, transported to a Portuguese East African port. Hold on real quick, man. We got this man over here picking up this stuff real quick, man. I apologize real quick. Hold on. Right. Man, I apologize for that right there, man. I apologize for that right there. But they say that okay, shipped across the Indian Ocean. So hold on. Let me see how fucking far that is. Hold on. Fuck that. Hold on. That's good. Man, it's 8,454 miles. It is 8,454 miles to travel from Madagascar to Ecuador or to that area. It's 8,000 miles plus. They want niggas to believe that story, just like the same way they want niggas to believe the story that the people came from Malaysia to Madagascar thousands of years, but not thousands of years, but they was the first ones to inhabit it. This is after death, before the people that's closer, that's right there, 200 miles away, and they coming. What's that? Hold on, what was it? 4,000 miles, 4,000 miles plus away. And we supposed to believe that story. I can't do it. So it say shipped across the Indian Ocean, transported to Panama. So they say they were sold into the Spanish slave market, but it ain't no records. They say he come from Madagascar, but he's African, and Madagascar is not in Africa. Oh, real quick. Moved across Panama City loaded. They have no records. He escaped, founded the Maroon community, and is the father of the Orobo lineage. This reconstruction aligns with the known Portuguese trade patterns, Spanish colonial slave routes, and early Africa Ecuadorian history. So I say, could it be a mistake in history that Andres is not from Madagascar? It's a smart question, and historians actually do debate early African origins in Americas because records from 1500s are often incomplete or ambiguous. Let's break down what we know for sure from your open page and what could realistically be historically mistake. So we're gonna look at it. Okay, so what the source say? Okay, and he is a black man from Madagascar, but it does not provide a primary document, a ship record, a baptismal record, a Spanish census entry, or any direct archival citation confirming Madagascar. So the claim is not backed by a specific historical document in the text. Could for, could for Madagascar be a mistake? Yes, it is possible. And here's why historians treat such claims cautiously. Spanish and Portuguese records often use broad or incorrect ethnic labels. In the 1500s, enslaved Africans were frequently labeled as the Guinea, the Angola, and the Madagascar. Even if not from Guinea, even if from Congo, even if from inland East Africa, sometimes used loosely for people from the Western Indian Ocean. So Madagascar could have been a literal origin, a mislabeled, a generic term of East Africans, a misunderstanding by later historians. Very few Malay people are documented in Spanish America, but for some reason, the founder of the Black people in Ecuador is the face. Most enslaved Africans in Spanish Empire came from West Africa, Congo, Upper Guinea, and Bafana region. East Africans, including Madagascar, were rare but not impossible. This rarity makes the claim plausible but not guaranteed. Okay, the page of statements may come from secondary scholarship. Wikipedia page cites modern historians, not original 16th century documents. Secondary authors sometimes interpreter and ambiguous records repeat earlier assumptions, fill gaps with broader context. This can include errors. Names like Mendici. Let me see. My bad for the background. Get it together in there.
Mangake.
Okay, Mangake. Okay, so names like Mangake do not clearly match Malaysian name patterns. Damn. So it don't even match the name. They just gave the nigga a name. Just put names on niggas. Do not resemble things of the period which often had Australian structure. This does disprove the origin. Enslaved people often had names altered, but it raises questions. Hell yeah, it's gonna raise questions. That's why I'm asking you, AI. So what's the most literally scenario? Based on what historians have known about the slave routes, possibly he truly come from Madagascar or transported through Portuguese Indian Ocean routes. Also possibly he was from Swahili coast, and later writers labeled him Madagascar because the Portuguese grouped East Africans together. Later, historians misinterpret the term. The record used a vague descriptor. Less likely, but still possible, he was from West Africa, and the Madagascar label is a later era. What it do? True Zone coming through, sitting through on Chrome. I'll be over there later on to tap in, but I had to get this off. Bottom line, yes, it could be a historical mistake. The claim that Andres was from Madagascar is plausible, but not definitely proven. And the page you reading does not cite a primary source to confirm it. If you want, I can. So I say, is it possible? Is it possible he is from Ecuador and was found there? It's a total reasonable question, and historians actually do consider this possibility when dealing with the sick. Damn, that's a lot of shit in the background. My bad. Fuck. It is totally reasonable question, and historians actually do consider the possibility when dealing with 16th century figures whose origins were recorded long after the fact. Let's look at what the evidence suggests and where the uncertainties lie. Let's look at it. Could Andreas have been native to Ecuador? Short answer is extremely unlikely, but not completely impossible. But not completely impossible. It's extremely unlikely, but not completely impossible. So it's a possibility. We have a chance. We have a chance. The page you're reading clearly states he was African. The source says Andreas was a black man from Madagascar. Even if Madagascar might be debated, the description of black man in 16th century Spanish records always meant African, not indigenous, which is pseudo. That is pseudo for the simple fact they went over to Papua New Guinea and named that whole island an African term. They have scrubbed a whole bunch of towns and places in Australia where they calling them nigger this and nigger that. They scrubbed it. And those are the indigenous people. Once again, even if Madagascar might be debated, the description of black men in the 16th century Spanish records always meant African, not indigenous, and that is pseudo. So he was not born in Ecuador as an indigenous person. That's pseudo for the simple fact they say it is not completely impossible. They don't know. But the fact is that the people had a strong hold over there. Okay, so they say, hold on. I'm fighting it. I'm going to stay fighting it. They say there were no African descendant populations native to Ecuador before the 1500s. How can they say that when they just gave it and said it was once again, but not completely impossible? See, that's the snake talking. Before the arrival of Europeans, Ecuador had no African population. Okay. No saying that they brought over Africans, but the black people that's found within the area, because they saying all the black people come from a shipwreck. All the Afro-Ecuadorian communities descend from shipwrecks, escapes, or slave imports beginning in the 1500s. Come on now. Once again, I showed the depiction they gave in the first Hollywood video ever in 1930. They depicted how they so-called brought over black people on the bottom of the ships and like that. They so-called had niggas on the ship like that for 8,000 goddamn miles, bringing niggas across the Indian Ocean. Wrong, that didn't happen. But they put that out there like that, so we just got done reading. But they have no historical documents, and I'm gonna prove they have no historical documents. with this. So it says Andres could not have been local Afro-Ecuadorian born in Ecuador. His story fits a well-documented pattern in Ecuador. Ships carrying enslaved Africans escaping into the forest, Afro-Indigenous Alliance maroon communities. The page states that Andres and the indigenous woman escaped. Once again, these are the descendants of the Nicaragua woman and the Madagascar man. They tell us that the people already over here has no resemblance to the black people here. I mean, to the black people across the world, they all look like Eskimos and motherfucking Mexicans. They have no resemblance to us. That's what they tell us. But the Nicaragua woman and the nigga from Madagascar, these are their descendants. Now, why the fuck, if I go have a goddamn kid with a goddamn Mexican, my kid ain't gonna come out looking like this. It's not gonna happen. So that's either telling me that the indigenous people, that the mama is an indigenous black person from Nicaragua, or the whole story is fucking made up and these are the people from this area. Now we're gonna keep looking into this with AI because I got questions. Hey, could the Madagascar part be wrong? Yes, that part could be wrong. All that shit could be wrong. If you a fuck nigga, you a fuck nigga all around. I kind of don't even want to hear from you. But we gonna look at it. Spanish scribes often misidentified African origins. They just putting labels on black people. Madagascar was sometimes used loosely for East Africans. The page does not cite a primary document. The name does not clearly match. So his last name don't even match the East African name. So the Pacific origin might be wrong, but the African origin is not in doubt. That is pseudo. That is pseudo. Because they just throwing names out there to describe people in America. Could he have been born in Ecuador to African parents? This is the only scenario where he could be from Ecuador, but it's not very unlikely because his life dates back 1543 early. There were almost no African women in Ecuador yet. Afro-Ecuadorians' birth communities didn't form until the late 1500s. The page explicitly says he arrived via slave ship. So he was almost certainly not born. He was almost certainly not born in Ecuador. Once again, they don't know. But the fact is that they are in America with motherfucking gold in their motherfucking ears and their nose, probably on their teeth, around their neck, niggas playing with it. We just looked at the Malaysia shit. I mean, not Malaysia, but the Madagascar shit. They ain't moving like this. In fucking Madagascar, these niggas ain't moving with the gold dripped out, draped up and dripped out. I didn't see that. These is all American practices of the people that been playing with the gold over here. They been playing with it. This is a unique lifestyle right here. So the final answer. He was almost certainly African born, not Ecuadorian born. The only part that may be mistaken is the Pacific claim that he was from Madagascar. He could instead have been from Zimbabwe, Swahili Coast, East Africa, or even West Africa. The nigga, fuck it, that nigga from somewhere over there. But they want us to say that the nigga ain't from America. Ain't no way that the nigga's from America. That's what they want us. That's what they pumping. But at the same time, pumping that motherfuckers traveled from Malaysia to Madagascar 2,000 years ago, before the people, which is a 4,000 plus mile travel on boat, which Africa is right there 200 miles, and they say they were the first people to inhabit it because we looking at DNA. And there's no way, but at the same time, they saying people traveled to Australia 100,000 years ago. And at the same time, they saying that the people came into America 18,000 to 20,000 years ago after the Ice Age. They say the final answer. They say if you want some, okay, so I got some more questions. I say, how is it a fact that all Afro-Ecuadorian communities descend from shipwrecks, escapes, or slave imports beginning in the mid 1500s if the historical is hearsay, and say this is a great question, and honestly, it is the kind of question historians love because it forces us to separate myth, oral tradition, and actual evidence. Let's walk through this carefully and clearly. Below is a key idea. The origins of Afro-Ecuadorian communities are not hearsay. They're supported by multiple independent types of evidence. By that doesn't mean every detail, like Madagascar, is certain. But let's break it down. Let's break it down then. My bad. Trip. Okay, what is hearsay in early Afro-Ecuadorian history? Some specific claims are hearsay or uncertain, such as the exact African ethnic origins of individuals. The exact African ethnic origins of individuals. They don't know where the black people from, but they there. The name of specific ships, whether someone came from Madagascar, Zimbabwe, or elsewhere, the details of shipwreck stories passed down orally. These details often rely on oral traditions, later chronicles, secondary interpretations. So you're right to question them. Yes, I will continue to question them. What is not hearsay? There are 4 independent lines of evidence from Afro-Ecuadorian communities, beginning with enslaved Africans arriving by ship, wrecked or not, in the mid 1500s. Wrecked or not. As a wobbler, these are not based on rumors. They come from colonial documents, archaeological geometry, and linguistics. Let's go through them. Let's look at it. Primary sources: Spanish colonial records. These include ship manifests, slave sale records, legal petitions, letters from governors, first baptismal records, reports from missionaries, military reports about uh, maroon communities. These documents explicitly describes Africans arriving in Panama, Peru, Puerto, Africans escaping from slave ships on the Pacific coast, maroon communities forming in Ecuador, Spanish attempts to pacify or negotiate with them. They say these are not hearsay, they are written records from the 15 to 1600s. B, archaeological evidence. Archaeological and shows African style pottery techniques, African foodways, yams, plantains, okra, African ironworking traditions, settlement patterns consistent with maroon communities. These mutual traces match African cultural origins. But these people so-called from Madagascar, the demographic evidence before the 1500s, Ecuador had zero African population, no genetic, cultural, or linguistic evidence of African presence, no African descent communities in the archaeological records. After the mid 1500s, Afro descent population appeared suddenly, applies in areas connected to shipwrecks, escapes, slave routes. This is the demographic fingerprint, not hearsay. Okay, not hearsay. Okay, you talking shit, huh? Okay. Linguistics and cultural evidence. Ecuador communities preserve African musical structures, instruments, African dance forms, African spirituality practices, African loan words. These cultural traits match West and Central African origins, not indigenous and Ecuadorian origins. So I find it interesting that they're saying that it's West and Central African origins, but the founder is an East African. So-called, matter of fact, not even the East African, from an island called Madagascar, not even African. The founder, huh? Okay, so let's keep looking. So why do some details feel uncertain? Yeah, a lot of them still feel uncertain. Yeah, you feel them. Enslaved Africans were rarely recorded by name. So how the hell this nigga got a full name? Origins were often mislabeled. Shipwreck stories were passed down orally. Colonial writers sometimes generalized or misunderstood African identities. So African identities is just African mislabels of people all around the world. Specifically, what we're talking about the New World right now, in Ecuador, which we see that a mislabel was put on the founder, said he was Madagascar, but um, there's no historical documents, which we're going to get to that. Where was I at? So historians can confidently say Afro-Ecuadorian communities began with Africans brought by ship in the 1500s, but they cannot always say the Pacific person came from the Pacific village in Madagascar. That's where uncertainty comes in. It gotta be. It gotta be uncertainty to the whole get down. Because this right here, this practice right here don't look like a West or Central African practice. Am I tripping? I could be tripping. I don't think I'm tripping. Is this a West or Central Africa practice right here? What is solid fact or what is interpretive? Solid facts supported by multiple evidence types. Africans arrived in Ecuador via the slave trade, starting back in the mid 1500s. Shipwrecks escaped escapes occurred on the Ecuador coast. Maroon communities formed their population from these Africans. Once again, Madagascar is not in Africa. Interpretive or in certain details, exact African ethnic origins of individuals, and it goes back to my Panama get down when they just found the people there and they just put an African term on the people. It goes to that same philosophy of mislabeling people in America and justifying why these people are in the area. Oh, it's a shipwreck. They had to survive the shipwreck and escaped. They had to be some pirates and they shipwrecked. Or they had to be enslaved in the bottom of the boats that shipwrecked and they escaped. And come on, that's the justify. That shows you the hate of the black people within the new world. So they don't even know the exact ship they were in, but they so-called, when we can so-called, what they say you can so-called go to the so-called the slavewarriors.com. They so-called got boat names and they got all type of stuff. So the final answer, the broad historical framework that Afro-Ecuadorian communities descend from enslaved Africans arrived by ship in the 1500s is not hearsay. It is supported by colonial documents, archaeological geometry, and cultural and linguistics evidence. What is hearsay or uncertain are the specifics about the individual origins, like whether Andres was truly from Madagascar. Was he truly from there, or was he really just from America? So I say, can you show me the shipping manifest and the slave sale records that took Andres to Ecuador? I can help you understand why those records don't exist. Once again, I can help you understand why those records don't exist. What does exist and how historians reconstructed the story. What does exist and how historians reconstructed the story, but I can't show you shipping manifests or sale records for Andre for one simple reason. There are no surviving ship manifests or slave sale records that mention Andre by name. And this isn't unusual, it is the norm in the mid 1500s. Let me walk you through this clearly and honestly. Please be honest with me. Why no records exist for Andre's? The period when he lived in the 1540s through 1570s is one of the worst documented phases of early slave trade. Excuses. Here's why: Spanish and Portuguese records keeping was inconsistent before 1590s. Individuals enslaved Africans were rarely named in manifests, but for some reason he got a first and last name. Many documents were lost to humanity, fires, wars, poor archiving. Pacific route slave shipments, Panama, Ecuador, were especially poorly documented. Maroon escaped Africans were never listed in official sale records. So the absence of documentation is not suspicious, it's expected. So they just expect for us to just believe that black people was never here, and that the reason that they're here is because of shipwrecks. At the same time, they was chained up at the bottom of the shipwrecks or at the bottom of the boats, which these are caravels. These are not even big boats at the time. These are caravels. Understand, these are caravels. They supposed to be chained up, fucked off, and they surviving a shipwreck at the bottom of the boat, chained up. And they are forming powerful communities. So I say, so what historians do have, even though we don't have a manifest naming him, we do have colonial records describing Africans escaping from slave ships in Ecuador, letters from Spanish officials about Maroon communities, missionary accounts mentioning African leaders in the region, legal documents from Curica referring to the Arobi family, 1600s reports describing the descendants of escaped Africans, the famous 1590 painting of the mulattoes of Ecuador showing their sons. Now, when they saying escaped Africans, and they're saying describing Africans, they're saying Negro. They not saying African in those documents during those time frames. These are primary sources. They trying to get at me. Say these are primary sources, not hearsay. They confirm African arrived by ship, which he was from Madagascar. That's not African. That's an island. Some escaped. They formed Maroon communities, was one of their leaders, but they do not preserve his original sale or transport record. but they do not preserve his original sale or transport record. But they know that he was a survival of of a shipwreck. I find that interesting. Where are the evidence? Okay. Why we can still say he was African? Why can you still say he was African? Even without a manifest, multiple independent sources agree. So most races agree he was described as a black man. Not even an African. He was described as a Negro. A black man. It didn't say no African, it say a black man. He escaped from a slave ship. Once again, a slave ship means that he was chained up at the bottom and it's a shipwreck. So that suspect, he found it. The maroon community, which means they found him. That's all it is. They found him. That's all that means. They found him. His sons were recognized by Spanish authorities as as black indigenous leaders. They weren't saying Afro back. They were saying Negro indigenous. These descriptions appear in Spanish administrative reports, missionary writings, early colonial histories. This is strong evidence, not a rumor. It is a rumor when you put in the Afro on there when they wasn't using the Afro term during that time frame. They was using a Negro. God damn, baby. What is uncertain? Here's the part historians debate. Was he specifically from Madagascar? This detail is not supported by a surviving document. It likely comes from later interpretations or secondary scholarship. So African origin solid. That's not solid. They just saying because he black, he from Africa. That's all they saying. Exact region, Madagascar, uncertain. Exact ship, uncertain. Exact sale record, non-existent. This is normal for the 1500s to just go around and just make up stories about the black people in the New World. Justified enslaving them. Bob, if you want, I can help you explore. I say, show me the earliest writing reference of the Adobe family. Here's a clear citation, grounded look at the earliest written references of the Adobe family based strictly on the sources returned in the search results. I'll show you what the earliest surviving texts actually say, who wrote them, and when they were written. So the earliest written references of the Arobi family, all citations come from search results you triggered. Okay, so Miguel Balboa, late 1500s, descriptions of Ecuador. This is the earliest known written account describing the origins of the Adobe lineage. Balboa recounts a story of a ship arriving from Nicaragua to the Bay of San Santiago, carrying passengers, Negroes, and Indians. He described one African man, which he's not from Africa, he's from Madagascar, they say. But just because he's black, matter of fact, they ain't even saying African, they just saying Negro, but they just that's the mislabel. See, that's the mislabel. How they just throw one African man, but during that time, they not saying, they saying Negro man who escaped inland with an indigenous woman. Indigenous woman. So once again, Negro man, indigenous woman, because they try to make a difference. How they kid come out like this? This is the mulatto. He the same color as me, or probably darker. Was his mother a black woman from Nicaragua, or was she just a black woman from America? But the story's so sloppy. No, they just throw terms. Okay, so let's get back to it. Okay, so Spanish colonial reports, documents from the 15 mentioned the Sun, Young, Maroon communities, conflict with the indigenous groups, negotiations with Spanish authorities. So the same thing that was going on, they having an incessant war with the people. They been just like what been going on before that. Before the people even coming over there. They been tripping. Some days we good, some days we ain't good. But these reports are referred to a modern summary. Okay, so early reports quoted in Oxford, African American Studies. This scholarly entries, early reports stating Francisco was the son of an African slave mentioned. Andres, a Nicaraguan woman, escaped from a slave anchored on the coast. First it was anchored. Now they saying it's a shipwreck. We got the snake talking with the two tongues. We got the snake talking with the two tongues. We got the snake talk with the two tongues. First they say that it was a shipwreck. Now they say that the ship was anchored. These early reports are colonial. Okay, keep going. This entry synthesized the earliest colonial references and confirms Andrew was an African enslaved man. They just saying a black man. When it says African enslaved man, that's just a black man because they had him as Madagascar. That's not an African. He escaped from a slave ship on the coast. Okay. So what this means, the earliest written references to the Adobe family comes from Spanish colonial documents from the 1570s, 1600s. So that's funny because the people got there. They say that the people so-called, they got there in the 1540s, but they don't have any documents of them in the 1540s. They just have documents of them in the 1570s. So they don't have any documents saying that, that they said that they were from those places or anything like that. They saying that the documents ain't there, but we know what we talking about. So we got Balboa, late 16th century chronicle, which preserves the earliest narrative of their origins. This is 1570s. This is 30, 40 years after the fact. if you want. Okay. So I have some more questions. Since Black's place of origin was a mislabel, could he have been from Panama? Here is the clearest, most historical, grounded way to think about this. And it actually gets to the heart of how colonial labels worked. Could Andres have been from Panama instead of Africa? Short answer, no. He could not have been from Panama. But the Pacific African origin he come from could absolutely be mislabeled. So once again, they saying no, he cannot be from Panama, but his African origin is absolutely be mislabeled. Let me explain why this distinction matters. Okay, explain it, please. I'm having problems. One, Black in 16th century Spanish records. Black in the 16th century Spanish records had a very specific meaning in the 1500s. Spanish officials used racial terms very regularly. You got Negro, means African born person. Mulatto is an African and indigenous ancestry. Indigenous, American, Indio, Mestizo. So we got these different terms, right? So we got Negro. We got African born person, Negro. But that's pseudo. That is pseudo because they going off lookership and they don't know exactly what a person was born. They saying, well, he black. He gotta be from Africa. That's pseudo. They do not call indigenous uh, Panamanians Negroes. They do not call Afro descendants people born in America Negro Bozels unless they were African born. So if a document describes Andres as a Negro enslaved, a Negro disservice, it means he was African born, not American born. This is consistent across all Spanish colonial regions. Could his African region be mislabeled? Absolutely. Spanish subscribes often misidentifies African origins. A Congolese person might be labeled Angola. A Zimbabwe might be labeled Madagascar. A person from Swahili Coast may be labeled Mina. Malikli person may be labeled Mazabe. So the mascot label is not guaranteed to be accurate, but the African identity is not in doubt. It is in doubt when they going around the world at the same time and they putting African terms on people in the world, just like I pointed out in Panama when they found the black people there and they called them Ethiopians and Guineas. So the African identity is in doubt. Why he could not have been from Panama? Here's what we known about Panama in the 1500s. There were indigenous groups, but there were never labeled Negroes, which that's a lie because the black people was found in Panama by Balboa. There were Africans in Panama, but they were all enslaved Africans bought from Atlantic or Maroons descended from Africans, which is pseudo because we have standings and we have ground, and we have a fact in Panama. That case, we got the Panama case. That's a fact. Afro-descendants people from Panama were labeled differently. They were called Cerelo Negro. So that means an African-born black, mulatto, Zambo. So Zambo, these people right here, it's called Zambos. They saying these are mixed people. They saying these are Zambos, mulattoes. And they saying not Negro in the African sense. How's this not? This is Negro in the African sense. So if Andres had been born in Panama, the records would not have described him as a Negro, or the terms would have preserved for African-born. They putting mislabels on them. The label is a mislabel, so how can they say that, okay, well, they would have called them this when they already mislabeled them? So they already mislabeled them off the jump when they said Madagascar. So we have to bring in the question, where is his true origin? Could he have been the Afro-Panamanian Maroon who migrated south? This is also extremely unlikely because the Maroon communities in Panama formed after the 1550s. That's a lie. We know that's a lie. AI, you're wrong on that one. Because we got the 1513, we got the case law 1513. And they say Andres was already an adult leader by the 1560s. But he so-called got to that area in the 1540s. The Ecuadorian Maroons are documented as originated from shipwrecks. Once again, shipwrecks and escapes, not migrations from Panama. Because they're from Ecuador. But the reason that I put the Panama in there, because they say that they was bringing over all the Africans to Panama, and then they'll walk from Panama down to the West Coast. As far as walk over Panama, as far as they coming from the Atlantic and they coming from the East Coast, they walk over Panama to the West Coast and down the Pacific. And you know what I'm saying? And that's how they was doing it. So that's why I had brought up that's why I had questioned the Panama thing. But I'm saying that the people is from Ecuador. I'm saying that they are original Ecuadorians. But I just put the question out there just to see what it would say. And it said some wrong information. They gave us some bad twerk. They gave us some bad work. So it says, Spanish reports describes his community as founded by African who escaped from a ship not by migrated from Central America. Okay. So once again, it's an African, which we know it's not an African because they say he's from an island, Madagascar. That's not African. And as we look at the beginning video about Madagascar, they say majority of Madagascar, or the first inhabitants of Madagascar, was from Malaysia. Not even Africans, not even the so-called East Africans, but from Malaysia. And they say that the average person within Madagascar is, I guess, 60%. It's almost like a half on the DNA. It's 60% African, and the other half is Malaysian. So when they putting these terms and all these things on the people, and then it's coming back, and they descendants is looking like this, and they so-called was with a Nicaragua woman, I got questions. Okay. So that should be going by quick. So the timeline does not fit. Hell no, it don't fit. What is possible? Here's the most historical, realistic range of possibilities. He was African born. This is certain. No, it's not certain. Y'all said he was in Madagascar. Y'all got so-called found him in Madagascar. Madagascar is not in Africa. It's an island. But they just saying he a black person. That's the certain African. That's all it's saying. Gotta read between the lines. I'm gonna help you. His exact African origins may be mislabeled. Yes. He may be from Ecuador. Found over here. And placed over here through a made up story to justify why black people is in these areas and doing all this crazy shit as far as not listening and doing their own thing. So they saying he could have been from all these places, even West Africa. Fuck, he could have been from East Africa, the islands. But what they not gonna say is that he's from America, and I find that fucked up. He escaped from a slave ship near Ecuador. This is consistent across all sources. But you know what? But do you know what? They say, but he was not indigenous Panamanian, and he was not Afro-American born in the Americas. They steady pushing back on him being from the Americas. But they gonna say it's a possibility that he could be from all of Africa. He can be from all of Africa and the island. But he can't be from her, even though we say that he escaped from a shipwreck in the bottom of the boat, chained up. Even though it's no the documentation, the primary sources on the family didn't come out until the 1570s, and he was so-called there since the 1540s, so-called. So what they say, the final answer, his African region of origin may be misidentified, but he cannot have been from Panama, Spanish racial terminology, demographic, historical, and the earliest colonial reports all confirm he was African born, even if Madagascar is uncertain. So they just telling us anything. I'm saying he from Ecuador. I'll just put the Panama thing within the mix because they say that the people come through Panama and they take them to the West Coast like that. So I say, how can the historian say he is African born without having historical documents to back their claim? They say this is a thoughtful question, and it gets to the core of how historians work with fragmentary evidence from the 1500s. The key is this: historians do have historical documents, just not documents that name Andres personally. They don't guess, they infer from multiple independent primary sources that describe the type of person he was, the community he belongs to, and the context in which he appears. Let me walk you through how this works. Historians don't need a birth certificate to know someone's from Africa. In the 1500s, Spanish officials used racial categories in a very rigid, consistent way. When colonial documents describe someone as a Negro, Negro Enslavo, Negro Bozell, it always meant African-born person brought through the slave trade, which goes back to the point where I say that a black person is going to automatically be the slave. He is automatically going to be a commodity within their society, no matter where he come from, but he's going to get that slave and African terminology, no matter where we find you at. So because you black, we already know that because we hating on you, we saying that you from Africa, even though we don't even know where you really from. We saying you from Africa. To justify, to enslave the person, and why the people is over here within these areas. But they have no historical documents. Now let's get to that. They say these terms were not used for indigenous people, which we know is a lie, because they just lied about the 1550, which we know it goes back to the 1513. Afro-descendant people born in Americas, mixed ancestry people, anyone from Panama, Ecuador, Nicaragua. So when early Spanish reports describes the founders of Ecuador maroon communities as Negroes, they were saying they were African, they were enslaved, they arrived by ship. This is not interpretations, it's how the Spanish racial system worked. It's a racial system. The Spanish racial system with dealing with black people, especially within the New World. The earliest documents do describe Africans escaping from ships in Ecuador. The page you're reading summarizes these early sources. Africans escaped from slave anchored coasts. They formed maroon communities, sons, Spanish. So they saying that they escaped in the 1540s, but they didn't start negotiating with them until the 1570s. And they say these are primary colonial reports, even if they don't list Andres by name. Davion coming through, sitting on 29. The Arobi family appears in documents as part of these, and these documents is in the 1570s. This is way after the fact. Of these Africans founded communities, the earliest references, which is not African, this is just black founded communities, because they're not using the term African during that time. They're using the term Negro. So it says, once again, they say Andres was an African, but they said he was from Madagascar. Madagascar is an island. It is not an African country. And then on top of that, we got scientists now saying that people from Malaysia was there before people from Africa. So it's making all this. We say, what did this nigga even look like? Did he look like a Malaysian and African mix? Did he just look like somebody from East Africa? At the time, East Africans was mixing with the East Indians? Man, what did this nigga really look like? But the fact is that they try to say that all the indigenous people is hella light skinned and all the slave people is black, but his descendants look like this and they playing with the gold. This is not a West African practice. This is not a Madagascar practice. These are American practices. Okay, so this information comes from Spanish administrative reports, missionary accounts, legal records, 1599 portrait. These documents don't need to say, okay, they say these documents don't need to say born in Africa. The racial terminology already tell us that's pseudo. That is pseudo. What historians cannot say. Here's the important distinction. They cannot say which part of Africa he came from, because Madagascar may be a later misinterpretation. No ship manifest survives. African origins were often mislabeled, especially for the people that they found in America. They cannot name the ship. They cannot name the captain. They cannot show a sail record. Those documents simply do not survive from the 1550s. What historians can say with confidence, which is hella pseudo, he was African, even though they say he's Madagascar, because Spanish documents name him as Negro. Once again, they not naming him African. They naming this nigga black. And they saying that it's because of an African-born person. Once again, we have case law with the 1513 Panama of the people that's found, and they try to mislabel them with Ethiopian and Guinea interpretations, just like they went over to Papua New Guinea and named the whole island after a small country in West Africa. Now they're saying that he is not indigenous or American born because Spanish records use different terms for those groups. Nigga, he was already mislabeled. So how can we take the fact that he not from America if they already put a mislabel on him? His community was part of a known pattern. Ecuador Maroon communities were formed by escaped Africans in the mid-15s. This is well documented, and I find that very interesting because, hold on, these niggas got a nigga fucked up. Hold on. Because within the same area, Because within this same area, hold on. Hold on real quick. Because I'm going back to that book, the Historical General of the Los Indians, where I have pointed out the fact, where I have showed as far as where they say they have found the as far as where they say they have found the black people within the Panama area, but I was just giving another source. But within this same book and this same get down, and this is the book right here. I can't zoom in on it, but that's the book right there. If you wanna follow, if you want to get in on that. But it's within the same area. Let me do this real quick.
They think that on one side it goes towards the Cape of Good Hope, and on the other towards the Molucca.
Hold on real quick. Just a little bit. Okay, hold on. This is on page 37. Hold on, let me stop right here with it, so we get a clear understanding.
The account that I keep in leagues and degrees is according to the charts of the king's cosmographers, and they do not receive or record the report of any pilot without an oath and witnesses. I also want to say that there are many other islands and lands in the roundness of the world, besides those we have mentioned. One of these is the land at the Strait of Magellan, which faces east, and which, based on its appearance, is very large and extends far toward the Antarctic pole. They think that on one side it goes toward the Cape of Good Hope, and on the other toward the Moluccas. For those on the ships of the Viceroy Don Antonio de Mendoza encountered a land of black people that extended 500 leagues, and they thought it continued with that of the aforementioned strait. Thus, the full extent of the land is not yet entirely known. However, what we have said forms the body of the land that surrounds the world.
So once again, we have a eyewitness account of traveling down that coast and witnessing 500 leagues of black people. 500 leagues of black people is 15,000 miles. This is the same area where they saying all these shipwrecks and all these stuff like that. So if these people were seeing 500 leagues, 1,500 miles of black people, it ain't got nothing to do with no shipwreck. See, but that's coming from a Spanish book. That's coming from the deep dive. So what they say, the final answer, historians don't rely on guesswork or hearsay. They rely on Spanish racial terminology, which clearly distinguish African-born people, colonial reports describing Africans escaping from ships, legal and administrative documents about Arobi family. The broader historical context of the Pacific slave trade. Once again, the Pacific slave trade, to where they saying that they bringing them across the Indian Ocean into the Pacific Ocean. Even without a personal birth records, the evidence overwhelmingly shows that Andres was African born, though the exact region, Madagascar or elsewhere, is uncertain. What was the term used for Negroes born in America? The term the Spanish used, the black people born in the Americas, the correct was Negro Criollo. In Spanish colonial racial vocabulary, Negro Bozels, African-born black person. Negro Criollo is an American-born black person. We got Bozels and we got Criollos. Criollos. Bozels and Criollos. The terms were used consistently across Spanish America, Portuguese America, church baptism records, slave sale documents, census records, legal petitions. Why this matter for your earlier question? If Andres was born in Panama, Ecuador, Spanish documents would have called him Negro Criollo, not Negro not Negro or okay. So they saying that, which we know that's a mislabel. We know that's a mislabel, and then it's gonna say, well, it depends on who wrote it. That's what they're gonna get to. Then the term Negro by itself in the 1500s meant African born, not American born. Once again, that's how they take the black people away from America and say, well, you look like them people over there. You can't be from her, even though we found you over here. You can't be from her. You got to be from over there with them people. Once again, they call these people Zambos, African and indigenous people. These supposed to be the mulattoes. How are these the mulatto people? So I say Negro Criollo communities in the 1500s. So a Negro Criollo community means a community American-born Afro-descended people, not Africans newly brought on ships. Okay. Did Negro communities exist in the 1500s? Yes, but only in a few places and only towards the end of the century. Here's why. The transatlantic slave trade into Spanish America began in the 1518, 1520, which proves my point again with the 1513, saying that if they was bringing over black people, they would have been Latinos and they would have been speaking Spanish. And we know that the people that they did find did not speak Spanish. And they saying that, so they saying that the first generation of Africans, and the Africans almost all Bozell. So I don't know what just happened right there. Hope everything is all good. But so they say the first generation of Africans and Americans were almost all Bozels, African born, even though most of them was born in Europe and all these other places, but they're not gonna say that. They're not gonna say that. It took 20 to 30 years before enough African women were present for children to be born locally. So the earliest Negro Creole birth occurs around 1540, 1560. You understand? So they saying 1540s, which we know it's not factual because they say that they was bringing over black people or African women in the during the early times, but just bring in the questioning. There's a lot of questioning. It brings in the questioning. So the communities of Creoles only became visible in record by 1570s and up. Where did early Negro communities from? Okay, in the Caribbean, the earliest: Santo Domingo, Hispaniola, Cuba, Puerto Rico. These islands had the earliest African populations, so they produced the first African-born black communities. Which we know it go back earlier than that. But that's just to show you that the information could be misleading. Everything on AI is not a fact. Because the dates, because we can go back earlier with those dates. If I start typing in some other stuff. So it's just naming. So just like here, they say Cimarroons. And they're talking about a free black militia in the 1570s. You know what I'm saying? And we know it go way back, way before that. Okay, and I find that very interesting. They say that it did not exist in the 1500s in Ecuador. They said that Ecuador did not have enough African women in the 1500s, but whenever they having kids with the indigenous people, this is the outcome of the kids. These are the mulattoes. These are not yellow bones. These are chocolate tones. So how are chocolate tones coming out mulatto? Once again, shipwrecks, escape from the slaves. But once again, we just got this document where it says 500 leagues. 500 leagues of Negroes within the same area. That's 15,000 miles. I mean, not 15,000, but 1,500 miles on the West Coast within the same area. So they saying if he was born in America, he would have been called this, a Negro Creole, which we know it's all mislabeled because they said that he was born in Madagascar and they can't stamp that. So that's a mislabel. And they gonna say, well, if he was from America, they would have named him this. No, they wouldn't have named him that. They would have named him whatever they wanted to name him. Just like they did. They said he was from Madagascar. And there's no historical documents. There's no documents to connect him with none of that. So they say this is why historians conclude that he was African born, even though the exact region is uncertain. Nah, we ain't buying that one. We not buying that one. So that was the breakdown of the AI deep dive. And another thing that I thought that was interesting was that was that they was called the Lords of the Land. In 1599, they was the Lords of the Land. They was the Lords of the Land in 1599. And I just find that very interesting for in one generation, since they say that, because the story is that just him and this woman just went in the woods and they had kids, and now he's the leader of a whole Maroon community, a person from Madagascar. They not doing any Madagascar, any traditions or nothing like that. They doing that what they saying West Africa traditions. So he's not from Madagascar. They say, matter of fact, they say he could be from. They don't even know where this man is from. But the fact is that they had a good rapport with the indigenous people, even though he did get killed by some other indigenous people. But they say that shit, he was cool with some indigenous people, so they knew the language. And they was the Lords of the Land within so-called, since the first documentation started about these people within the 1570s. So within 20 years, they the Lords of the Land. They saying they trying to pacify them, just like how they doing all the other Indians within the New World. They're pacifying. They trying to, trick them. They're trying to bring them in with the trickery, with the gifts. We're going to give you this. We're going to give you that. Let's work together. Come with us. Go over here to go get these other people, and I'm going to pay you. So they say that the first people in Madagascar is not Africans. They are Malaysians. And the average in Malaysia is 4,350 miles away. They say they are the first inhabitants of Madagascar. The Africans came after them, even though they 230 miles away. They saying that the founder, the number one man of Ecuador when it comes to the Maroon communities, was a black man from Madagascar, which they have no historical documents to confirm this. They have no historical documents with his name, but he got a first and last name. And he is the founder of the Blacks of Ecuador, which him and a Nicaragua woman had kids. And how they try to portray it when they try to say, oh, it's an indigenous woman. And they lineage come out like this. They descendants come out like this. Chocolate tones. Not no yellow bones. Not no red bones. Chocolate tones. Once again, proving that these people in Ecuador are the indigenous people from their area, found in their area, but they coming up with they trying to justify why these black people is in these areas to be able to enslave them and take from them, to be able to have permission from the church. and also debunking the same time that I'm not jacking the human migration that they said they had in Madagascar, because if that was the case, this person that they brought over would have been an Asian African type looking person. Why are they kids chocolate? And why is science trying to tell us? Well, now they coming out with it. Matter of fact, let me play the little clip real quick. As far as the little shit they've been trying to come out with that I played the other day on my nigga True Zone shit. Let me play this shit real quick on how they trying to justify now as far as why black people is in.
Before that,
just make sure that you're pulled up and rolled up. You know, I'm glad that you showed up. Comment, like, subscribe, tell a friend, and tell a friend. And do it again.
before that, I have another question. The Olmecs, you were talking about the genetics of these people that live in Native Americans, that they vary widely, have very similar features, the thick lips, the wide noses. Why do we think that is?
Well, this is part of a curious mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery. It's been known by archaeologists for quite a long time that there are anomalous skulls in parts of Brazil, which appear to show very strongly Polynesian or African features, very much like the features that we see on the Olmec heads. And a number of archaeologists who got into trouble with their colleagues for this have used that to argue many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, that the settlement story of the Americas is much more complicated than we've realized. And what the DNA is doing is it's telling us that there was something really weird happened with settlement. You see, what happened with those African or Polynesian-looking skulls was that they were tested for DNA when DNA technology was not as advanced as it is today. And what that DNA showed was that they were more closely related to modern Native Americans than they are to any other people in the world. So the notion that there was some connection with Polynesia or Africa was dismissed. But now that we have very firm evidence of an Australasian genetic signal, Australian Aborigines, Papua New Guinea, Melanesians, with those kind of features, now that we have evidence that is found in the Amazon, we have to go back to that old evidence and reconsider it.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to find out what that is.
Some fries, with cheese, nigga. Hey, yo, make that double burger with cheese. See, y'all niggas shoot your stupid ass over nothing. Come on, man, we supposed to be brothers. Oh, what, you trying to get smart? Nigga, are you trying to catch some knowledge? Nigga, fuck that, nigga. Give me your motherfucking jury, nigga. Take that shit. You gotta pay you to your brother, huh? Your brother? Yo, this motherfucking shit. Better be than the motherfucking cops, nigga.
As I'm on.
Times are getting crazy. 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 Times are getting crazy.
crazy.
Times are getting crazy, the grind is getting lazy. So instead of grinding, I got this bitch that pays me. Conscious fat, the jealous got me strapped. I'm a cold pressed cripple with a gift to rap. Born in the O in 1970, and ever since then I've been soaking game ho. Now my game is strong, the dollars come low, not only from my bitch, but from my rap song. Suckers stay back, cause they know weak, especially when they heard me in the 9 o'clock beat from the VPD. I steady get harassed, those damn black and whites and that motherfucking tash. They steady sweating me, they ain't letting me live my young life, and they smooth rejecting me because of young brothers from a black minority. They wanna lock you down in the youth authority. Homie, please, I'm out to stack G's. Flip me a yacht to cruise the 7 seas. A Benz with a hunt that beats good. A drop top Jag or a damn Fleetwood. Caddy, fool, a nigga wants to roll straight high side with his pockets swole. Cause money makes the world go around. That's why I'm you hear me throwing down? I get paid, cool in the shade with a big fat split and a game of bootleg. To get tipsy, or should I say hurt? Times are getting crazy, I'm gonna go berserk. Jealous motherfuckers trying to keep me at the bottom. Cause funky fresh rhymes, they know I've got them. And jealous fools, white, older than 20, wanna sweat because they broke, man, they must be young Brits. Sweat, young brother, I'm 17. If you live in the Crest Lane, you know what I mean. They don't want to grow up. Shit is making me sick, about to throw up. Listen to the game in my jams, cause times are getting crazy for a young black man. Living a life with a felony record. If you try to get a job, you smooth get rejected. Come on, my brother, let's get some shit right. Get it right. Get it together and get your shit right. Cause times are getting crazy. Times are getting crazy. Times are getting crazy. Times are getting crazy.
Hey, times getting crazy, man. You done heard what he said. How many times you gotta say it so? Boy, you know what time it is. Times is getting crazy.
Times are getting crazy. Times are getting crazy.
Time, they getting crazy. I say time, they getting crazy. I say a time.